Hey folks, tonight we're diving into the unbreakable discipline and soul-crushing misery of the Roman legion, that elite war machine that conquered half the known world and gifted us sandals, perfectly straight roads, and the fine art of yelling in Latin while stabbing people. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe only if you actually like what I'm doing here. No fake clicks. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Always fun to see who's tuning in from all over the globe. Now, turn off the lights, fire up the fan for some white noise, and let's enjoy tonight's little journey together. So, do you think you've got what it takes to make it in the Roman legion? Adorable. Like a kitten trying to file taxes before you can even dream about getting skewered in battle. You've got to survive the recruitment process. Think Rome's version of a talent show. Except the only talent that matters is, does this guy look like he could haul a baby donkey uphill while bleeding? Step 1, introduce yourself to the recruiter. Strip down. Puff out your chest. Dream big. The recruiter's seen thousands of trunks and isn't impressed. He'll check your teeth not to admire your smile, but to make sure you can bite through a rock-hard loaf without keeling over. Flat feet rejected. Chicken wings rejected. Cute little violent fears rejected too. Height matters. Stamina matters. Got a face that doesn't scream. Please don't hurt me. Big bonus points if you pass the test. Congrats. You're considered healthy. In Roman speak, that means you won't die instantly. Then you swear an oath not to Rome itself, but to your commanding officer, who probably hasn't smiled since his last crucifixion gig. This oath is taken super seriously. Break it, and you're not just fined. You get beaten, stabbed, or killed. Sounds like a wild fight move. But nope, it means your own unit beats you to death to boost team spirit. Still with me? Good. Now sign up. Trade your youth for a tunic. And brace yourself for the next 25 years of back pain, digging trenches, and having aggressively oiled mustache guys yelling at you. They call it an honor. Romans line up for it. Some even get excited. They say it's an adventure. Glory. They say most don't make it past the second blister on their sandal. And citizenship doesn't exactly make it easier. In fact, it's mandatory. If you're the unfortunate mix of poor and Roman congrats, the Legion is your future and your therapist. Of course, if you're not Roman, you can still join. They just call you auxiliary, pay you less, and throw you on the front lines like a particularly nervous piece of meat. And that's just the application process. You made it through recruitment. You're in. Hooray! Now the real fun begins. The system that systematically erases your identity. Forget your name. You're no longer Gas, Titus, or Mr. Nice Abs. Now you're just Miles. Latin for soldier, or more accurately, a shovel, walking around, looking anxious. Your new identity wrapped up in leather straps, brass plates, and the unmistakable aroma of something dead in your boots last week. Your hairstyle, the tragic bowl cut standard. Your clothes, one size fits no one. Everyone dresses the same, marches the same, and bleeds the same. Want to express yourself? Great. Try winking in Morse code during inspection. The Legion isn't about fashion. It's all about uniformity. And your new best buds. 50 sweaty guys in the same tunic. Just as miserable and interchangeable as you are. Personality is a threat. Being unique is suspicious. Laugh too much. And the captain might think you're plotting something or worse. That you're actually enjoying yourself. You're crammed into a tent with 7 other soldiers, stacked like overcooked lasagna noodles. If one guy snores, the whole squad suffers. If someone farts, everyone immediately questions their life choices. Oh, and your gear. Forget optional. Gladius. that short stabbing sword, scutum, the giant shield, and pilum, the throwing spear. None of these are suggestions. You haul that stuff everywhere, along with your cooking pot, pickaxe, spare sandals, and whatever's left of your enthusiasm. Free time. You mean those 2 hours squeezed between digging ditches and standing guard in the rain? Sure, use it wisely. Maybe polish your armor or cry quietly into your vinegar water. Discipline isn't just enforced, it's practically a religion. If one person screws up, the whole unit pays. This creates what the Romans called camaraderie and what modern therapists call shared trauma. Want to speak your mind? Cute. Keep that to yourself unless you enjoy running around in armor while your centurion screams Latin curses about your mother. You're not a man anymore. You're just a cog in Rome's war machine, a machine that can't tolerate rust, hesitation, or outbreaks of individuality, especially outbreaks. By the time they're done shaping you, even your mom won't recognize you, though she might still wonder why your armor smells like stale feet. Ah, yes, the centurion, the commanding officer, your life coach, discipline guru, and part-time thundercloud. Think military life is tough. Wait until you meet the grizzled, scarred, yelling man-child in charge. The centurion isn't just your boss. He's your walking, shouting personal mental breakdown, usually in his 30s or 40s. In Roman terms, that means he's halfway to sainthood just for surviving that long, covered in scars from every battle he ever screamed through, probably wearing at least one ear like a necklace. His armor shines brighter than your future. His temper's quick, especially if someone sneezes during formation. A centurion doesn't just train you. He breaks you down and rebuilds you into a slightly less annoying version of yourself. You'll hear his voice more than your own thoughts. His favorite hobby, yelling your full name, followed by orders you definitely don't want to follow. Like dig faster, march faster, or stop dying on him. He wields a vine stick called a vetus, which sounds poetic until you realize it's just a fancy cane for beating people. And he uses it with the enthusiasm of someone working through childhood trauma. Ask for his opinion. You might end up scrubbing the latrine with your toothbrush if toothbrushes even exist in this nightmare. Don't obey public flogging. Need a break? Suddenly your rations mysteriously vanish. Just kidding. He'll make you dig a hole, bury your sense of humor in it, then cover it up. But credit where it's due, centurions are terrifyingly competent. They lead the charge, enter danger first, and retreat last. If you're bleeding in the mud, your centurion will either drag you to safety or scream at you until you get up out of guilt. To him, discipline is sacred, weakness is contagious, and comfort is for savages and poets. You don't love your centurion, but you fear him, respect him, and maybe have nightmares about his stomping sandals chasing you. In short, he's your boss, your worst nightmare, and your only hope to live long enough to get yelled at again tomorrow. So you survive the shouting, cursing, and soul-crushing. Welcome to camp life, the 5-star resort version of the Roman Legion, where luxury means dirt, sweat, and someone snoring right in your eyeball. First thing to know, there's no such thing as free time. If you're not marching or fighting, you're digging. And if you're not digging, congratulations. You're building something that's going to need digging up later. A trench, a fort, a wall, a ditch, then another trench. Rinse and repeat. The Romans were obsessed with earthworks probably because they knew someday historians would need something to talk about besides toga fashion. Your day starts at dawn, rudely yanked awake by a whistle that sounds like optimism slowly dying. Then you throw on your tunic, sandals, armor, and show up for duty. You don't actually get to work. You just show up and hope not to get stabbed with a Vetus stick. Then it's training time. Endless training, marching, about turns, stabbing straw dummies with all the enthusiasm of a tax-paying swordsman. Every move has to be perfect, because sloppy formations mean death. Or worse, getting caught by the captain after you build camp. It has to be reinforced every night. Yep, even if you just stopped for a snack. You and your buddies grab shovels and start digging like your life depends on it, because, spoiler alert, it does. Mealtime. Imagine this: barley porridge that tastes like sadness, a bit of cheese that upsets your stomach, and sour wine watered down because water was a luxury and flavor was just a myth. Toilets shared, trenches with a sponge on a stick. That's all we'll say about that. Evenings were for maintenance cleaning gear, fixing sandals, and desperately trying not to cry where everyone could see, if you're lucky. You get to roll dice with the guys before passing out on a straw mattress that smells exactly like the dude who slept there last night. Privacy? Forget about it. Comfort? Nope. But blisters? Oh, you've got blisters for days. This is not downtime. This is not marching time. And even then, you have to brace yourself for the captain's voice, booming over camp like thunder. Hey, you call that a tent? If you thought joining the Roman legion meant epic battles and grand speeches, surprise. Mostly, it meant marching. Lots and lots of marching. By the end of your service, your feet will have opinions and none of them polite. A Roman legion marched 20 to 30 kilometers a day, usually fully loaded. Fun fact, all that gear weighed about 90 pounds, depending on how much you wanted to survive armor. Shield, sword, 2 spears, cloak, cooking kit, rations, tent stakes, and any emotional baggage you brought from home. This was called the mule load. And guess what? You were the mule. The pace was brutal. Not your Sunday stroll through the countryside. Fast, relentless, designed to weed out anyone with knees brave enough to complain. Every mile someone would trip, fall behind, or suddenly remember they were the son of a senator. Technically, there were short breaks just long enough to drink water, eat a handful of barley porridge, and regret life choices. Then back on the famously straight Roman roads, because generals thought turning corners was for cowards and philosophers. And yes, you had to build a fortified camp at the end of every marching day. Yep, march all day, then dig, hammer, and sweat on a military-themed home improvement show, except no prizes. And your only audience is the captain silently judging you with crossed arms. Blisters common. Losing toenails, almost a rite of passage. Falling asleep on the march happens a lot. Trip and fall. You'll get yelled at. Complain. You'll get mocked. Fake an injury. The medic will smack you with a sponge and kick you out. If you try faking an injury, the doc will slap you with a sponge and kick you right out the door. But the Romans didn't complain. Not because they were tough, but because they were too out of breath to even whine. Complaining takes energy. And all their energy was reserved for not face planting on the rocks. So, if you join the Legion, dreaming of glory, just know you'll mostly spend your time hiking to where the glory's supposed to happen and praying it hasn't left town yet. Congrats! After marching for hours with a backpack heavier than your self-esteem, you earned the right to train for something that might actually kill you. Combat training in the Roman Legion is where your glory dreams get stomped out, preferably in a controlled environment. Under the watchful scowl of a guy wielding a stick. Lesson 1. Your beloved gladius sword. That short, stiff blade you imagine swinging heroically like in the movies isn't for slashing. Nope, no slashing. You stab with it, right into the squishy bits. The groin's the prime target, then the armpits, the lovely neck, aka The cook's kiss spot. Why? Because stabbing takes less effort, kills faster, and doesn't have your sword stuck in someone's chest like an amateur. The Romans were practical like that. Cold, efficient, and unimpressed by showboating. You practice stabbing on wooden dummies called peel, basically logs pretending to be savages. And you stab those dummies over and over until your shoulder aches, your palms bleed, and your captain mutters something about your lousy wrist stabbing technique. Then comes shield practice. The scutum is huge, almost a mobile wall, and you're expected to use it like one block. Bash. Build shield walls. It's all fun and games until someone gets run over by a cart and passes out in the mud. Sparring matches. Oh yes. You fight your new buddies with wooden swords and the barely contained rage of someone who hasn't had privacy in weeks. Injuries are common, teeth optional, and if you get knocked down, your reward is a handy lesson that the enemy won't wait for you to get up. Princess, who also trained with the pilum, the Roman throwing spear, a clever little stick designed to bend on impact so the enemy can't chuck it back at you. Basically, it's got one job: stab once, then retire, just like you'd want. And remember, all this happens while you're decked out in full armor, baking in the heat, with barely any water, and a lot of yelling. You train every day because one day you'll be shipped off to Gaul or Dacia or some other place where the locals greet you with axes. After all the marching, stabbing wood, and your captain's eyebrow mockery, that day finally arrives. Your first real battle. Your nerves spike, your legs go numb, and your underwear suddenly feels way too tight. Let's not talk about that part anymore. The enemy stands on the other side of the battlefield, probably some curly-haired vampire wannabes screaming like they just stepped on a Lego speech, wielding curved swords and nursing a personal grudge against helmets. Either way, they look terrifying. They smell like goats. And fun fact, they hate you. Your squad commander blows the whistle. You're expected to form up perfectly, hold your shield like your life depends on it because it does, and move forward like you're trying not to remember if you updated your will. The turtle formation, aka the Tudo. Shields all around, shields on top. It protects you from arrows, mostly. It also turns you and your buddies into a giant metal sandwich, clanking and sweating profusely. Arrows rain down like a storm. You hear them thud against shields, screams, and occasional yells of, "Oh, not fast enough." You inch forward, praying to every god you can remember, plus a few you just made up. Then comes the clash, the shouting, the shoving, the chaos. Your training kicks in. You stab with your gladius, trying to find soft spots between armor without getting stabbed right back in the face. The guy next to you drops. No time to cry, blink, or breathe. The air's thick with dust, blood, and the harsh realization that this isn't a training dummy. The enemy yells things you don't understand, but the meaning is crystal clear. They're not here to negotiate. Your commander rushes past you, bashes someone's head like he's stirring soup, and yells, "Hold the line," Rich thought, considering you're just trying not to get torn apart right now, after what feels like an hour or a year. The whistle blows again. Retreat. Advance. You don't care. You're still alive, which is way better than you expected 15 minutes ago. And as you stagger back into formation, bloody, exhausted, and a bit battered, you realize one thing: you'll have to do this all over again tomorrow. So congrats. You survived your first battle. Amazing. You didn't get your head chopped off, trampled, or turned into a spear target. You're probably feeling pretty invincible right about now. Cute. Because in the Roman legion, the real danger only starts after the battle ends. Let's start with wounds if you got stabbed, cut, or poked just a little. Congrats. Now you get to experience Roman field medicine. Basically, a mix of hard liquor, prayers, and a guy named Lucius who once saw a bone and decided he was a surgeon. If you're lucky, your wound's shallow, your doctor's sober, and no one drops a red-hot iron bar into the mud before using it on you. If not, well, say hello to your new nickname, Lefty. Then come the diseases. Less like hidden threats and more like overenthusiastic party crashers. Dysentery's a popular choice. It spreads through camp like gossip. Before you know it, half the group sprinting to the latrines while the other half's moaning in a puddle of regret. Hygiene technically. It existed. Shared sponges passed around like party favors. And no one had the slightest clue about germs. Probably because they were too busy dying from them. Malaria, typhoid, infected blisters, athlete's foot, and some weird mystery growth on your foot that's definitely not part of the tent. All part of the fun experience. No sick days allowed. March until you drop. Then we'll talk. Oh, and don't forget parasites, worms, lice, and fleas. Your body's less a temple and more a bustling ecosystem. But suppose you get a fever, a purple arm, or a toenail trying to escape your foot. You head to the valetudinarium, the Legion's hospital. Sounds fancy. Right, nope. It's just beds, groans, and a guy heating up a knife. And if you're not better in 3 days, you're not sick anymore. You're just dead weight quietly dumped in a ditch and replaced by the next rookie curious about that rash. Suppose you fall asleep, drop your spear, or heaven forbid blink during formation. What happens next, pain? Yep, pure, unfiltered pain. The Roman legion ran on discipline like pubs run on booze and bad decisions. Every rule had a punishment. Every punishment came with humiliation, and your centurion lived for that. Bet he practiced his death stare more than sword fighting. First offense, maybe a public flogging, just a little whipping in front of your buddies, like a violent team-building exercise. The lashes came from the vides, a type of vine. Fun fact, it left marks shaped exactly like your dignity. Caught dozing on guard duty, not a slap on the wrist. That's death? Seriously, Romans figured if you were tired enough to nod off, you were tired enough not to care about getting stabbed. But the crown jewel of Roman punishments was legendary slaughter. Suppose your group retreats without permission. Maybe you ran screaming from battle instead of heroically dying like a model citizen. Punishment. Your unit splits into groups of 10, and they draw straws. The unlucky one gets beaten to death by the other 9. Yep, you heard that right. Your buddies beat you to death with batons just because you ran a tad faster than the guy next to you. Even tiny slip-ups got treated like war crimes. Take off your helmet, jog in circles, humiliate the commander, dig a ditch, fill it back up, dig again until you pass out or he gets bored. And if you dare complain, oh boy, you'll be running to the latrine so fast your sandals won't even touch the ground. Picture lugging buckets of regret-filled liquid under the commander's unamused glare since the Republic fell. Why so harsh? Simple. The Romans believed fear was the secret sauce for unity. A legion that fears its centurion more than the enemy. Yep, that's the idea. And weirdly enough, it worked. Welcome to Castra, your new home, like summer camp. But instead of gummy bears and friendship bracelets, you get blisters, a girl, and an existential dread you didn't ask for. Your tent, made of leather and false hope, houses 8 grown men armed with swords, blisters, and totally mismatched sleep schedules. Just the smell alone is a tactical weapon. If you thought the Roman legion was a shining beacon of discipline, one night in this tent will change your mind. Beds. Nope, not a single one. You sleep on the ground, hugging your shield like a sad Roman teddy bear. If it rains, your tent leaks, because nothing screams imperial glory like waking up soaked and clutching some guy named Gas. Then there's the food. The Roman field diet is a glorious cycle of barley porridge, hard bread, and more barley porridge, seasoned with whatever dirt, bugs, or shame the day brought. Occasionally, if the gods are feeling generous, or a chicken wanders into camp, you might score some meat, but usually it's just tough bread and sour wine that doubles as mouthwash and disinfectant. You think mealtime's your chance to chill. Wrong. You cook your own grub over a shared fire using an iron pot that may or may not have last been cleaned during Augustus's reign. Burn the food, and you become the camp joke. Somehow, that's better. Daily chores are a blast polishing weapons. Fixing roads, digging ditches, building fences, hauling supplies, basically everything except relaxing. And the best part, you do all that after a day of marching, training until your legs scream, and dodging some weird fungus your tent mates caught last week. Evenings, not for reading scrolls, nope. That time's for guard duty, dice games, fist fights, and occasionally listening to the world's saddest flute player. Don't forget the nightly inspection by the centurion, who looks at your armor like you just insulted his mother. Some folks actually dig that vibe. There's a rhythm to the misery, a bond forged by shared pain. Mockery of the newbie who tried bathing with cold vinegar. You've spent weeks convincing yourself you're the sword of civilization, the fist of order, the sandal-wearing guy standing on the right side of history. Surprise! The enemy never got the memo. To them, you're no hero. You're the invader, an armored tax collector with a pointy stick. You show up uninvited, torch fields, insult their gods, then demand tribute, all while pretending it's for the greater good. No idea why they're not thrilled. Take the Gauls, for example, to Rome. They're just hygiene-challenged savages with ridiculous mustaches. But to the Gauls, you're the hated empire that pops up every few decades to liberate them from slavery or German tribes. They don't have fancy roads or togas, but they've got axes and a solid belief that you deserve to die. They see your shiny armor and formations, then respond with bear skins, primal screams, and brutal close combat that even veterans reconsider their life choices. And don't forget the Parthians, horse archers shooting arrows while galloping, a move the Romans called cowardly and unfair, mostly because it works too well. The problem, your enemies aren't just fighting to survive, they're fighting for revenge. Last time you came by, their brothers, sons, and livestock got taken. They've spent years sharpening weapons and nursing grudges. They don't fight by fancy tactics or rules of engagement. They hide in the woods, ambush supply wagons, and stab you in the back while you're just trying to pee behind a tree. No rules here, just rage, mud, and a personal vendetta to see you gutted alive. And if you get caught, best not to think about it. Let's just say the enemy definitely skipped reading the Geneva Convention. You might get paraded like a trophy, forced to dig your own grave, or end up as a sacrifice to some antler-obsessed god. So while you imagine your enemy as savages, they picture you as a monster, a marching symbol of oppression, arrogance, and really annoying parade songs. Turns out, history depends a lot on who's writing it. After 25 years of marching, bleeding, sweating, and somehow not dying, that's considered a win. Finally, you get to retire. Or as the Romans put it, let's see who's still left unstabbed. Let's start with the big dreamland. Rome promises veterans a cozy little farm somewhere on the frontier, a peaceful patch where you can grow olives, complain about the youth, and not get pike stabbed in the face. Sounds awesome, right? except that land's usually in enemy territory, surrounded by locals who still remember when you torched their cousin's village. So, your golden years might include a few surprise ambushes as a retirement perk. Think of it as retirement with cardio. Then comes the pension or prime minister gig, a nice payout. Assuming Rome's got money and your commander remembered to file the paperwork before dying in a swamp. If not, you might get paid in IOUs, pottery shards, or a firm handshake and a reminder that glory is its own reward. Some vets turn their skills into coaching gigs, training rookies with all the love and care they once received. But most just walked away, bodies full of wounds, scars galore, and nightmares filled with battle drums and ghostly screams that never quit. You can spot a veteran by their limp, their squint toward the horizon, the instinct to dig trenches in their garden, and their extensive social circle. In some places, you're respected as a living relic of Roman might. Elsewhere, you're just the grumpy old guy muttering about discipline at the market. But hey, you're still alive? That puts you ahead of most folks. You survived countless battles, diseases, 100 armies, and the world's harshest sandals. And now you get to yell at your grandkids in Latin and maybe whittle a wooden sword. Life in the Roman legion came with a lot of certainties, mostly about death. Face death enough times, and you either develop a rich spiritual life or become insanely paranoid, on average. A legionnaire worshipped as many gods as an Olympic stadium could hold spectators. You had Jupiter for lightning and power, Mars for war, and Fortuna for when you really needed that spear, rather than having it bounce off someone's helmet and stab your best friend again. But Roman religion wasn't just worship, it was micromanaging the universe. One tiny ritual at a time. You didn't just rush into battle. First, you sacrificed an animal, usually something soft and unlucky. If the priest poked its liver and said, "Yep, that's a nice spleen," congrats, maybe the gods are on your side. Maybe. The legion had its own guardian gods too. The genius of the legion was a sort of divine mascot, except instead of costumes, it was foam. He lived in a tiny shrine and judged every move you made. Of course, superstition filled the gaps. You wouldn't dare put your left sandal on before your right, or sharpen your sword on a bad omen day. And if you spotted a raven's feather while oiling your armor, you'd better start digging your own grave and label it reserved. Dreams were taken very seriously. Dream of fire. That meant victory. Dream of rats. That meant betrayal. If you dream that your commander is smiling, it means you're dead and just haven't caught on yet. And don't expect them to dish out any prophecies. Birds flying the wrong way. Lightning striking at inconvenient times. Someone sneezing 3 times in a row. All signs that Jupiter's bored and about to spice things up. Does this devotion guarantee protection? Nope. But hey, death feels a little less scary if you believe Mars himself signed off on your face getting chopped off. And for some folks, believing the gods are watching gives them courage. For others, it just means one more reason to be constantly on edge. Because in the Roman legion, even divinity has a kill count. You don't sign up for glory. You sign up because the recruiter promises bread, coins, and maybe not starving to death. But once you're in, oh boy, you're just a tiny cog in Rome's glory machine. Survive a battle. Don't expect medals or a fancy cloak. Instead, you get a speech usually shouted from a makeshift podium by a general who's only dirtied his sandals once. As he storms into the bathhouse, he'll rant about bravery, honor, and eternal Rome greatness. While you try not to puke from blood loss or heat stroke, your roll cheer, nod, and definitely don't mention your best buddy got decapitated by a spear 5 minutes in. But back in Rome, the story changes. You're a hero. As long as someone else tells the tale, politicians love using your misery as a backdrop for their victories. Mosaics get laid down, triumphal arches get built, statues get carved, but your name, that's a rare luxury. Maybe, just maybe. You get mentioned in some scroll if you do something truly legendary, like holding a bridge solo or dying in a ridiculously poetic fashion. But odds are, you're filed under brave soldiers who gave it their all, squeezed between a warhorse and a supply crate. Meanwhile, senators in purple robes sip wine and brag about their cousin's cousin who commanded your unit. That's how you become part of legend as a footnote in someone else's family tree. And the public, they love Roman victory stories, especially when told by poets who never saw a battlefield. To them, your 3 muddy days of war are a touching tale of Roman strength. They skip over the dissent, the yelling, and your buddy trying to eat his belt out of desperation. Yeah, you got glory, but not for you, for the Republic, for the Empire, for those rich guys whose names get carved in stone while yours gets forgotten by lunchtime. Still, there's something noble in that, a tragic kind of immortality where you might die a dozen times. But Rome keeps on ticking. Venice in the mid-3rd century wasn't the place for small ambitions. Canals buzzed with merchants chatting, coins clinking, and exotic spices wafting in from mysterious ports. It was a republic built on trade, and Marco Polo, born in 1254, was born into the merchant class like a duck to water, except, unlike most ducks, Marco was born to cross deserts. His dad, Niccolo Polo, and Uncle Maffo, not your average merchants. They weren't hawking jewelry in the square or haggling with local fishermen. They were silk-robed explorers who vanished eastward long before Marco could even speak. When they returned to Venice in 1269, the boy had grown into a curious teen with wide eyes and questions that could sink a ship. When Marco finally reunited with his dad, he wasn't greeted with toys or bedtime stories. He was handed a destiny wrapped in camel hide and strange maps. Niccolo and Maffo had visited the court of the Mongol emperor, Kublai Khan, and they were determined to go back with their bright-eyed son this time. Just imagine, you're 17, you just left the city, and suddenly you're told, pack your bags, we're walking to China. No boats, no safety nets, just horses, warm breath, and hope. Yeah, weird call. Marco wasn't trained in diplomacy. He wasn't some fancy translator. Heck, he didn't even speak Mongolian. But what he did have, stuff school can't teach relentless curiosity and a sharp eye. So in 1271, Marco Polo left Venice with his dad and uncle, heading east on a journey over 15,000 miles long that'd take almost a quarter of a century. They weren't soldiers. They weren't priests. They were merchants playing a deadly game, or visionaries, depending on your generosity. Venice gave him a shot at trade. The road, it promised the whole world. The journey kicked off with the Pope's blessing, literally. Before diving into unknown lands, the Polos stopped in Acre in the Holy Land for holy oil and letters from Pope Gregory VI for Kublai Khan. Because apparently, if you're heading into the Mongol Empire, best bring gifts, divine endorsements, and paperwork. After that little detour, the real adventure began. They marched north into Armenia and Persia, lands where deserts stretch like punishment, and the sun tries to roast you right through your cloak. It wasn't just the heat or sand they had to worry about. This was bandit country. If the terrain didn't kill you, the people might. Bandits prowled the mountains like wolves, eager to lighten your load, starting with your throat. Marco didn't just survive. He soaked up every scrap of info they could get. He absorbed impressions like a sponge in a fish tank. He marveled at Zoroastrians worshipping fire in Persia, sipped weird drinks, and learned to read the minds of people who didn't speak his language. Quietly trained by experience, part merchant, part anthropologist, part survivor. The Silk Road wasn't just one road. It was a tangled network of caravan trails winding through scorching plains, ruined forts, and cities popping out of dust like mirages in places like Yazd and Balkh. Marco saw architecture that looked like it was designed by sorcerers, strange little boxes filled with things he never imagined: rhubarb, lapis lazuli stones, gunpowder, and camels. Too many camels. Grumpy, farting camels. Always cranky. Each one more stubborn than the last. Any romantic notions Marco had about adventure got smashed fast under the monotony of desert life. Camel spit and constant bickering. They pressed on over mountains, the roofs of the world, where the altitude steals your breath and the wind howls like it's cursing your name. The air thinned. Marco got skinnier, but not weaker. His grit thickened like calluses on his hands. Months passed, then years. Nearing the Yuan border, Marco was no longer just a merchant's son. He spoke several languages, had survival skills, and was used to a world most Europeans thought was made up. The boy from Venice was becoming the man who'd change how Europe saw the East. When Marco Polo reached the heart of the Mongol Empire, he was exhausted, sunburnt, and honestly, probably smelled like a dead Tibetan yak. But none of that mattered anymore. Ahead of him, in the great city of Chengdu, stood Kublai Khan's palace. And this was no ordinary royal palace. Forget European castles. This was a sprawling, lavish complex with marble halls and silk tents, trimmed in gold like a jewel in the Mongolian wilderness, guarded by elite warriors and packed with scholars, magicians, elephants, astronomers, and interpreters. It was more like an international airport than a royal palace. And Kublai Khan, not your typical emperor either. He was Genghis Khan's grandson, ruling the biggest empire in history, stretching from the Pacific all the way to the Black Sea. Yet, he welcomed the Polo trio like old pals. Why? Because he loved gossip. He craved info like a dragon craves treasure. And Marco? Oh, Marco had stories. Khan instantly liked the young Marco. Maybe it was his curiosity, or maybe how he talked about Persia, India, or Armenian customs, like he was reciting poetry. Either way, Kublai saw potential and gave Marco a gig at court, just like that. A Venetian teen became the go-to envoy for the most powerful court in the world. Marco wasn't just sitting there admiring carpets. Khan sent him on missions across China and beyond. He visited provinces like Yunnan, Sichuan, and even ventured deep into what's now Myanmar and Vietnam. Marco became the empire's eyes, ears, and sometimes its mouthpiece. He saw paper money being used like magical scrolls of economic power. He spotted huge postal stations with strong horses ready to roll every 25 miles. Basically, this was the 13th century Amazon Prime era. He rode through cities with millions of people, clean streets, and working sanitation systems. Meanwhile, Europe was still chucking chamber pots into the alleys. At least Marco took notes on all this. His real masterpiece came much later. For now, he was soaking it all in geography, customs, even textures, colors, smells, and human quirks. The merchant's son stepped into the dragon's palace, not scared, just fascinated. The longer Marco Polo served Kublai Khan, the more surreal and sophisticated the empire got. This wasn't the barbaric mess Europe liked to whine about over wine. No. This was an empire draped in silk robes, astronomical observatories, a working bureaucracy, and cities that made Paris look like a damp little village. Let's start with the capital, Kublai's Kbalik, now known as Beijing. Marco described it as so huge, you could ride a horse half a day and still not reach the palace. wide boulevards, organized markets, public granaries, and even neighborhood inspectors reporting crimes. Meanwhile, Europe blamed crop failures on the devil. Then there was the food. Marco tried things Westerners hadn't even dreamed of: weird fruits, rich sauces, fermented mare's milk he politely tolerated, and culinary inventions like noodles, kind of like what Italians would later call pasta. Coincidence? Historians are still arguing. Marco wasn't just eating fancy meals and sightseeing all the time. He saw Khan's justice system in action, super efficient. Thieves got their noses chopped off. Corrupt officials faced dramatic executions. The Mongols gave no second chances, but protected merchants and enforced religious tolerance. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Taoism didn't matter as long as you paid your taxes. Speaking of taxes, Marco was amazed by the empire's management. Provinces were divided into counties, each with supervisors, clerks, and rotating officials to stop corruption. Paper money was backed by gold and still held value after death. Try rejecting a UN bill today. You'd lose more than just your wallet. Marco also described the Mongol postal relay system. Horse stations every 25 miles stocked with supplies, food, and shelter. Couriers could deliver messages across the empire faster than any European king could text his backyard. But maybe the most amazing thing was the multicultural vibe. Khan recruited Persians, Arabs, Chinese, and even Europeans into his government. Everyone had a role. The only rule: be useful. For Marco, it was eye-opening. Europe was still drowning in religious wars and feudal nonsense, but in the East, knowledge and efficiency were king. And Khan calm, calculating, curious, not just some conqueror with a sword. He was a manager, a visionary, and in Marco's eyes, the most powerful man on earth. The Venice kid was now seeing a world his hometown couldn't even dream of, and he was just getting started. Marco Polo's role in Kublai Khan's court was never boring. One day, he's a diplomat sent to negotiate with rebellious vassals. The next, he's racing through the hills of Yunnan to report on mineral resources or check tax collections. And sometimes, just sometimes, he's a spy, disguised as a local, quietly watching who's loyal to Khan and who's not. So how does a teenage foreigner earn that kind of trust in Earth's mightiest empire? Spoiler, it wasn't just luck. Marco had two superpowers: observation and storytelling. He could walk into a village, chat with farmers, learn their customs, taste their food, and come back with a report so vivid it was like Khan himself had been there. Marco didn't just collect info, he collected atmosphere. He could describe a man's gait, the noon market smell, or the rustle of silk in a governor's sleeve when he was lying. The Khans valued that kind of detail. Marco wasn't your stiff bureaucrat. He was a walking scroll, part anthropologist, part court jester, part human GPS. It wasn't shocking that he could charm an entire room, despite being a foreigner. He was fluent enough in Persian and Mongolian for everyone to get him. And when words failed, his flair for drama took over. He could mimic voices, describe monsters so theatrically you'd swear they were real, and spin legends that even battle-hardened warriors had to lean in for. But his journey wasn't all fun and games. On one mission in India, Marco nearly died from fever. Another day, his caravan was attacked by mountain tribes. He got stabbed, luckily, not fatally, and was once imprisoned for 2 weeks because of a misunderstanding. Forced to eat chicken heads and goat milk until someone noticed his Mongol badge. Still, he endured. He witnessed elephants parading in jewel-encrusted armor, Hindu beauty rituals walking through fire, Tibetan sky burials that made his stomach churn, and a southern land so hot everyone believed eggs could fry in the sand. Through it all, Marco never flinched. Every encounter, near-death experience, and marvel he filed away in his mind like invisible ink. Little did he know, his tales of paper money, funeral birds, mountain demons, and silk cities would one day shake Europe's worldview to its core. By the early 1290s, Marco Polo had served the Great Khan for nearly 2 decades. He'd crossed mountains, deserts, jungles, and oceans, survived fevers, political plots, and more than one arrow flying way too close to his chest. But Venice was starting to call him home, like a nagging voice you can't ignore. Problem was, Kublai Khan wasn't keen on letting him go. The Khan family, now older and increasingly paranoid, had grown attached to Marco and the Polo clan. They weren't just useful, they were part of Khan's inner circle, trusted like few others. Letting them leave was like sacrificing your favorite chess pieces before the final move. But fate, as usual, stepped in. A Persian prince needed an escort. His future bride, a Mongol princess named Kakachin, was sailing from China to Persia. The land route was too dangerous, and the trip needed people Khan could trust not to get lost, die, or accidentally start a war along the way. Naturally, he picked the Polos. This wasn't just an awkward family vacation. It was a logistical nightmare. A fleet of 14 ships, over 600 passengers, diplomats, priests, warriors, cooks, and a terrified teenage princess carrying the weight of a dynastic alliance on her shoulders. They left Quanzhou Harbor in 1292. What followed was a slow-motion disaster storm shredded the fleet. Pirates circled, and disease wiped out most of the crew and passengers. Out of the original 600 people, only a few dozen survived, including the Polo family and the princess, when they finally dragged themselves into Hormuz nearly 2 years later. It wasn't a diplomatic visit. It was more like a haunted shuffle. But hey, mission accomplished. The princess was born, and the prince was very grateful. Then Khan headed back to China and died in 1294, never seeing his Venetian buddy again. Now nothing could stop the Polo family from heading home. They didn't return in glory. They came back confused as hell. Venice was at war with Genoa. Nobody recognized them funny clothes, weird talk, pockets stuffed with jewels sewn into their hems. People whispered that they were either imposters or completely crazy. After 24 years of searching, Marco Polo finally came home, and Europe didn't know what to do with him. You'd think, after surviving deserts, Mongol politics, sea plagues, and enough palace drama to fill 10 lifetimes, Marco Polo would just retire, sell some silk, and groom a nice Venetian beard. Nope, he threw himself straight into prison. Right after he got back, Venice went to war with their favorite nemesis, Genoa, as a loyal Venetian citizen. Marco joined the fight because what better way to fit back into society than getting thrown into a naval battle? He got captured in 1298 and tossed into a Genoese prison, where fate finally handed him a quill, a captive audience, and a one-way ticket to immortality. His cellmate was Rustichello da Pisa, a romance writer who spent his career writing about knights. Basically, the medieval version of a sci-fi novelist. Marco started telling him about paper money, cities with 1 million people, volcanoes, cannibals, and black stones hotter than firewood. Rustichello's jaw hit the floor. He grabbed ink and parchment. Say that again, slower. And thus, Il Milione was born. Marco's travels. Marco narrates. Rustichello embellishes. Together, they wrote a travel diary so wild and spectacular, most Europeans couldn't tell if it was fact, fiction, or just a fever dream. Readers encountered wonders they'd never heard of paper money. Coal, porcelain, snow leopards, rhubarb medicine, Buddhist temples, Siberian shamans, and palaces with golden walls. Marco vividly described cities like Hyo and Kbalik, making European capitals look like piles of hay. But not everything passed down was true. He talked about unicorns, probably rhinoceroses, men with dog faces, likely misunderstood tribal tattoos, and giant birds carrying elephants into the sky. Let's just call that poetic license. Was everything accurate? Nope. Was it honest? Maybe. But who cares? The book spread like wildfire, translated into many languages, hand-copied and devoured by scholars, merchants, and dreamers all over Europe. Most folks back then thought he was either a liar or nuts. But a Genoese sailor, born decades later, read Marco's words, closed the book, and muttered, "What about that sailor named Christopher Columbus?" Marco Polo's bedtime stories from prison changed the whole course of the Western world. Marco Polo was way ahead of his time. In fact, he was so far ahead that most of his contemporaries just thought he was full of himself, even after returning to Venice. Even as his travels spread like wildfire across Europe, people still had trouble believing him. He talked about cities bigger than any in Christendom, stones burning like fire, black people, golden palaces, and folks who bathed daily. Just that last bit was enough to make medieval Europeans furrow their brows. Scholars debated whether he really traveled as far as he claimed. Some accused him of copying old Arabic sources. Others insisted he never got past Persia. After all, he barely mentioned the Great Wall of China, and his descriptions of tea and chopsticks were suspiciously vague. But they totally missed the point. Marco wasn't writing a Lonely Planet travel guide. He was a merchant, a storyteller, and most importantly, a guy obsessed with Venice, not some PhD in stage design. He jotted down what he saw, what he remembered, and what totally blew his mind. And considering he had no camera, no notebook, and was basically rattling it off from memory while rotting in a Genoa jail cell, cut the guy some slack. Despite the skeptics, Marco Polo actually became famous while he was still alive. A weird kind of famous, more curious uncle who swears he saw a mermaid than beloved hero. People knew his name, but treated him like that uncle who insists he met a mermaid. Interesting. Sure, but not exactly dinner party citation material. Still, the book survived. It got copied, translated, and passed hand to hand. It found its way into libraries of kings, merchants, priests, and explorers. It planted the seed in newbie minds that, hey, the world might be bigger than their backyard. As Marco got older, he slipped back into merchant mode. He got hitched, had 3 daughters, and quietly ran his business out of Venice. But he never backed down from his stories. In fact, on his deathbed in 1324, surrounded by priests pushing him to confess and recant his tall tales, Marco supposedly said, "I haven't even told half of what I saw." Not a challenge, just the truth. Because how do you explain the vastness of the world to folks who never left their street? You don't. You write it down, send it out, and hope the future listens. Marco Polo quietly kicked the bucket in 1324, but his story was just getting started. Over the next centuries, his travels became one of the most influential books in world history. It wasn't just a bestseller in monasteries in Europe. It was the seed planted in the soil of imagination, geography, and ambition. Sailors, scholars, and emperors clung to those tales like blueprints for a world they hadn't touched yet. Cartographers studied his words closely, turning stories into mountains and cities, some real, some pure fantasy. The first maps of Asia, with names like Kath for China and Zipangu for Japan, came straight from Marco's stories. In a world where most of the globe was just a blank sheet, he sketched the shape, color, and content, even if a bit wonky sometimes. And then there's that Genoese sailor guy. Christopher Columbus didn't just read those travels. He studied, annotated, and took them to bed like a bedtime story. When he set sail west in 1492, he literally carried Marco's words with him. Columbus thought he was heading east, just as Marco vividly described. Instead, he accidentally stumbled on a whole new world in a weird twist. Marco Polo's imagination helped spark a discovery he never imagined. But legacy isn't about accuracy alone. It's about impact. Marco's descriptions of strange religions, cultures, and people, filtered through a European lens, were revolutionary. He introduced readers to the idea that the world wasn't just bigger, it was smarter, richer, and way more complicated than church sermons let on. He helped smash the medieval belief that civilization stopped at the Alps. In doing so, he didn't just stretch map edges. He expanded minds. Sure, he got flack. Later, historians picked apart his claims and tall tales. They wondered why he never mentioned the Great Wall, which wasn't that impressive back then, or why he exaggerated mythical creatures. But none of that erases the fact he inspired generations to explore, question, and dream. Marco Polo wasn't just a traveler of roads. He was a traveler of ideas, and on history's big ship. That might just be the greatest journey of all. If you want to get ancient Rome, don't start with marble statues or Senate speeches. Start with the street vendors. The real heartbeat of the empire didn't echo through grand forums. It simmered in clay pots tucked away in smoky alleys, where the poor lined up, starving and clutching a few stray coins. Most Romans lived crammed into cramped apartment blocks. They called them insulae. Picture a 5-story wooden fire trap. No plumbing, no insulation, and most importantly, no kitchen. Cooking at home was a fire hazard, and basically a luxury for the rich. The rest just ate out. Enter the Thermopolia, Rome's answer to modern fast food joints. Little stalls with open fronts and big stone counters holding clay jars, each filled with something edible and usually piping hot. Stews, lentils, beans, salted fish, boiled cabbage, mystery sausages swimming in garum, if it could be boiled, fried, stewed, or fermented. You'd find it on the street and smell it from miles away. Vendors shouted out their specialties to slaves, soldiers, workers, and anyone too broke or too clever to cook for themselves. A few copper coins, and boom, you're set with a hearty meal. Maybe chickpea pancakes. Fried dormice, yes. Really. Or flatbread, smeared with honey and crushed herbs. And then there's garum. Oh, garum, the sacred fish sauce that kept the empire running, made by fermenting fish guts in the sun until it turned into a salty brown sludge. Garum was drizzled on almost everything. To Roman taste buds, it was liquid gold. To us today, probably just a smelly mess. But Thermopolia weren't just about food. They were gossip hubs, gambling spots, and trading posts. Hungry mouths mixed with whispers of politics, crime, and scandal. Gladiators could chow down with merchants, freedmen with thieves. In Rome, social status limited your fancy dining options, but here hunger was the great equalizer. To get real Roman life, you don't need scrolls or sculptures. Just listen to the bubbling stew, the scraping ladles, and the chef swearing at a kid stealing a fig. This is the empire's belly, and it's always rumbling. If you time traveled to a Roman neighborhood around noon, the first thing you'd notice is the noise, then the stink smoke, fish sauce, spices, sweat, and bread. The city wasn't built on bread and circuses alone. It ran on lentils and grease-soaked frying pans. Welcome to the Thermopolium, the common Roman's food stall, not your modern restaurant. Small, fast, and everywhere you looked. Archaeologists in Pompeii found over 150 of them, including counters with deep dolia big clay pots that kept food hot and ready to sell. Most thermopolia were right on the front of apartment buildings. You'd step up, lean on the counter, and point at whatever looked least terrifying. The owner, usually family, would scoop your food into a bowl, often warning you not to ask what was in it. The menu was pure Roman style. You could enjoy poles, a grain porridge cooked with everything from honey to leftover meat. There were lentil and chickpea stews, boiled cabbage, grilled fish, and for the brave, sausages soaked in garum, that ultra-punchy fish sauce. If you were lucky, you'd get fried cheese or pastries sweetened with dates and sesame seeds. For Roman workers, thermopolia were convenience stores, cafeterias, and social networks all rolled into one. You didn't just come for food. You came for news, tax complaints, gladiator debates, and maybe to grease some palms. Roman graffiti often mentioned these places, praising the food or roasting the owner. One scribble in Pompeii said I slept with the waitress at the inn. Yep, Yelp reviews haven't changed much. And yes, there were drinks too molesome, a cheap mix of wine and honey, super popular, alongside watered-down vinegar called pasca, loved by soldiers and masochists alike. Of course, the elite didn't give a damn. They thought thermopolia were filthy, chaotic, and low class, but at least they didn't have to fight over a warm flatbread at midnight after some public party. For regular Romans, these street stalls were lifesavers, cheap, hot, and fast. Rome's answer to McDonald's wasn't golden arches. It was a steaming pot of bean stew in a clay bowl. When you think Roman cuisine, you probably picture senators nibbling on roast turkey or slurping oysters from silver platters. That's only if you were rich, powerful, and obsessed with outshining your neighbors. But if you were poor, like most Romans, your diet was very different. Less turkey, more porridge, and I mean a whole lot of porridge. Daily life started with real hardship. Poor Romans ate beans, a mushy barley or wheat porridge that tasted like nothing at all on lucky days. It was jazzed up with olive oil, garlic, or chickpeas on unlucky days. It was just hot grain mush, the Roman equivalent of sad oatmeal. Street food was the poor person's escape from boredom. Chickpea pancakes, panissuras, were all the rage, cheap, filling, and packed with protein. Flatbreads grilled over coals popped up everywhere, usually sold plain or slathered with garum, a popular fermented fish sauce. It was like the ketchup of Rome's lower class, except smellier, saltier, and way more divisive than pineapple on pizza. If you had a bit more cash, you could buy some boiled veggies, usually spinach, onions, or cabbage. Meat was rare and not always fresh. Street vendors sold sausages, but no one dared ask what was actually inside. If you found a real chunk of beef or pork, congrats. Either you're lucky or you've been scammed. Chickpeas were everywhere. Lentils, too. Fish dried, smoked, or salted was a common protein source, but rarely the good kind. Imagine anchovies baking in the sun for a week. Yum. Still, for a Roman laborer sweating under the sun, a warm bowl of lentil stew and some flatbread was heaven. Sweets were a luxury, but did exist. Street vendors sold date cakes, honey-glazed donuts, and mustard, crackers made from grape must and sesame seeds. Not much money, but after a long day hauling bricks or sweeping streets, it was enough to make a man believe in gods. And drinks water was unreliable. Poor Romans often drank watered-down wine or pasca, a sour vinegar drink that sounds like punishment but weirdly quenched thirst on hot days. For poor workers, survival wasn't about decadence. It was about whatever filled your stomach, cost less than a penny, and didn't kill you. Smoky, fishy street food did exactly that. If there was one ingredient that defined Roman street food and made modern folks raise an eyebrow, it was garum. This wasn't just a seasoning, it was a nationwide obsession, a status symbol, and probably a public health hazard, all bottled up in a clay jar. So what exactly is garum? In short, fermented fish guts. Take a pile of anchovies or mackerel, mix them with salt, bake them in the blazing sun for weeks or even months, and wait for them to turn into a brownish yellow sludge. Strain out the bones, bottle the goo, and boom, garum, Rome's most valuable export product, also considered a war crime in a bottle, depending on who you ask. To Romans, garum was magic. It added umami before anyone even knew what umami was. It showed up everywhere: porridge, stews, sausages, veggies, even fruit. There were different grades, too. A fancy clear liquid for high-class banquets, and a thick, murky version for street stalls and slums. It was expensive. Good stuff. Possibly pricier than wine. Top-tier garum came from places like Pompeii or Hispania, where entire coastal towns were dedicated to making vats of this stuff. And this was no backyard operation. These were massive industrial centers, with towering piles of clay and fishy steam polluting the air indoors, many miles away. But the poor, they don't care where it came from. On the streets, garum was the ultimate balancing act. Dump it on lentils, stir it into chickpeas, slather it on bread. It made bland food palatable and gave street vendors a slick way to hide if their goods were fresh or less fresh. Think of it as Rome's soy sauce or ketchup. Every thermopolium had its own secret garum recipe. Some smelled herbal, some spicy, and some would totally fail modern food safety tests. People even drank diluted garum to cure hangovers. Honestly, that says a lot about Roman booze habits and their stomachs. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Philosopher Seneca called it an expensive spice for daredevils. Others just said it was downright disgusting. But smell or mystery aside, garum was the flavor of Rome. It fed the army, fueled the emperors, and clung to every sizzling sausage on every street corner. Garum wasn't just food. It was identity, served with a ladle and a scent you'd never forget. Fast food didn't start with burgers and drive-thrus. In Rome, the idea of grab and go was totally a thing unless you needed a napkin. The city thrived on movement, and so did the need to eat on the fly. For millions hustling crowded streets, working long hours with zero time to lounge like senators, street food stalls were more than lunch spots. They were pit stops in the daily marathon. One of the most popular grab-and-go snacks, chickpea fritters. Crispy outside, soft inside, sold by the handful. Cheap, protein-packed, and vegetarian-friendly. Not everyone in the suburbs worried about cholesterol. Flatbreads were everywhere, sold by the slice or plate. You could eat them plain, rub garlic on them, or spread leftover olive paste or stew. Some even had honey and herbs. Others were just pure carbs in the most portable form, perfect for workers needing calories. Not chit-chat. Then there were stuffed pastries, some sweet, loaded with dates, nuts, and honey. Others savory, filled with mashed lentils, boiled eggs, or even fish sauce. Think of them as Rome's version of hot sandwiches made with love and zero food safety standards. Cheese showed up regularly, too. Street vendors sold aged sheep cheese dry enough to survive Rome's sun. Simple, tasty, perfect with wine or a side of desperation. Speaking of wine, yes, they often drank it on the go. Wine mixed with water or honey, sometimes heated, sold by the cup from stalls, or carried by peddlers in leather bags. Mulsum, a sweet sausage, was a hit with workers and anyone wanting to mask the taste of a sketchy sausage. Don't forget the fruit: figs, grapes, and fresh olives were easy to carry and bought from street hawkers shouting through the chaos. In cold seasons, roasted chestnuts were the warm snack of choice. Simple, nutritious, and perfect to munch while dodging angry goats and free-range chickens. Not glamorous at all. This grub wasn't fancy, but it was fast, cheap, and enough to feed a million-person city. Rome ran on bread, garum, hustle, and street food vendors kept that engine revving in Rome. What you ate and where you ate it were basically a status symbol. Street food was never just about filling your belly. It was a daily ritual to show off your rank, your income, and just how close you were to a tapeworm infection. For the poor workers, thermopolia or salvation. No stove in your crumbling apartment. And even if you had one, it was a fire hazard, and the rats already took it over. So, you squeeze into the crowd, toss a few asses, a handful of bronze coins, and get a spoonful of lentils or a greasy sausage dripping with garum sauce. You don't ask questions. You just eat whatever's still hot and keep moving. But for the middle class, artisans, freed folks, and merchants in Rome, street food was a bit more curated. You could hire better vendors, get fresher ingredients, or even hire a personal chef to whip up hot meals at home. Some would linger at famous stalls for specialties, maybe fried cheese, date pastries, or grilled squid if you're feeling brave. You could even snag a seat on a little stool. Fancy. Meanwhile, the upper class had a totally different vibe with street food. In public, they looked down on it like it was plague. A true Roman noble dined on cushions, served by slaves, sipping wine from crystal, nibbling on peacock tongues served by some dude named Cassius who held the napkins, standing at a food stall like a sweaty worker. Totally embarrassing. But here's the kicker: they still ate it. Senators disguised in cloaks sneaked into poor neighborhoods at night for roasted chickpeas or to score garum straight from the source. Even the rich couldn't resist fresh honey fritters. Writers like Martial and Juvenal roasted the hypocrisy hard. The upper crust mocked the poor for eating foods they secretly craved themselves. And let's not forget the slaves. They were at the bottom, but made up a huge chunk of the population. Their meals were whatever scraps they could scavenge, steal, or collect, usually leftovers from their masters, or the generous scraps from stall owners. But sometimes, just sometimes, they got a taste of fried pancakes or sausages like the free citizens. In those moments, class lines blurred, at least on the tongue. In Rome, food wasn't just about survival. It was a drama, a performance of status, struggle, and survival. If Rome's street food was lively on regular days, festivals turned it into pure chaos, a delicious mess of smells, smoke, and wine. Romans loved their festivals, and by loved, I mean wild, noisy. Daily ragers where gods got worshipped, slaves got drunk, and everyone forgot who owed who money. Dozens of these festivals popped up every year, flooding the streets with food faster than the Tiber swells in spring. At Saturnalia, the big December bash that makes Christmas look like a knitting circle, slaves got to eat alongside their masters. Social rules flipped upside down. Vendors roasted whole pigs on spits, handed out fried pastries, and sold hot wine spiked with pepper and honey. The streets smelled like a meat shop collided with a bakery, and nobody complained. Lupercalia, the noisy fertility festival in February, was just as wild. Young guys ran naked through the streets, and food stalls kept up with the crowd. A feast of blood sausages, fatty meat, fried chickpeas, and thick bread to soak up all that spilled wine. Even religious festivals had their greedy side. After sacrifices at the temple, the edible bits of the animals were sold to food vendors or handed out to the crowd. Street vendors took that fresh meat, stewed, fried, or stuffed it into bread. It was the Romans' sacred BBQ party. Street vendors made bank during these events. Peak business hours, baby. They worked overnight loading up pots, pastries, grilled fish, honey cakes, and all sorts of goodies into big jars called dolia. Kids begged for sweets. Old men argued over olive fritters. And everyone drank way too much mulled wine. Sweet wine that tasted like a hangover in progress. Of course, with food came problems. Greedy vendors watered down the wine. Meat sometimes went bad, but still got served. And pickpockets treated crowded stalls like all-you-can-eat buffets. Somehow, nobody cared, at least until the hangover hit. Festivals weren't just about honoring the gods. They were a pressure valve for a city teetering on the edge of madness. And food was right at the center of it all. Steamed, fried, drizzled with sauce, served in clay bowls, and eaten with greasy hands under lantern light. It wasn't just a meal. It was Rome being all casual and totally unbothered. Roman street food could fill your belly and light up the city, but not everything was stew and sizzling sausages. Beneath the steam and shouting was a darker layer, where food could kill you, fool you, or get you into serious trouble. Let's start with food fraud. Rome had 0 health inspectors. If your lentil stew smelled funky, well, that was your problem. Vendors often watered down wine, mixed chalk into flour, and used spoiled meat spiced just enough to trick your nose. A classic trick: soak rotten fish in garum and call it fresh catch. You didn't ask the cook. You prayed to Mercury, god of thieves, and hoped for the best. Prices, good luck. Dishonest vendors cheated on scales, used bent ladles, and swapped ingredients mid-stew. One day, you got chickpeas. The next day, just beans and disappointment. Pompeii's graffiti even roasted shady food sellers by name, like Yelp reviews, but with more burn and terrible spelling. Sometimes the risk was even worse than just a stomachache. Street vendors were famous for bribing officials to snag the best spots or block rivals. Fights broke out over stall locations. At least one riot in Sabura started over a food stall spat. Spoons flew. Broth spilled. Someone even lost a tooth over an olive fritter. Then there was poison. Yep, deliberate poisoning was a thing. Rome had plenty of enemies, and food was the low-key weapon of choice. More than one senator died from poisoned wine or figs dusted with glass powder. If you were rich, you traveled with a food taster. If you were poor, you just rolled the dice every time you took a bite. And we haven't even mentioned the rats, cockroaches, and general garbage situation. Most stalls sat right next to open sewers. Leftover food hit the streets. Dogs, cats, and hungry slaves fought over scraps like gladiators without swords. Hygiene wasn't just bad, it was legendary. If your gut wasn't tough by age 10, you probably wouldn't make it to 15. Still, Romans kept coming back day after day. Food could be dangerous, but it was also irresistible. Because really, what's a little stomachache compared to a hot meatball soaked in garum? You might think Roman street food died with the empire, swept away like dust and ash. But the truth is, those smoky stalls, boiling pots, and greasy snacks left their mark all over modern cuisine. You might have tasted ancient Roman food without even realizing it. Let's start with the basics: bread. Flatbread sold at Roman stalls wasn't much different from modern Italian pizza bianca. Add olive oil, garlic, maybe some fermented fish paste, and boom, you're just one street vendor away from a first century lunch reenactment. And chickpeas, still a Mediterranean staple, whether mashed into hummus, baked into farinata, or fried crispy as modern falafel. Romans' love for legumes has stood the test of time. Their barley, or wheat porridge, wasn't much different from today's polenta, or even savory oatmeal. Then there's garum. Though the original Roman brand's fame has faded, its descendants are thriving. Southeast Asian fish sauce, Worcestershire sauce, even some soy sauces share that same umami punch. The idea of a fermented flavor bomb Romans nailed it long before it was cool. Even the concept of street food quick, affordable meals sold at tiny shops traces back to Roman thermopolia. Modern food trucks, taco stands, and kebab carts might look flashier, but the vibe's the same: hot food, cheap prices, killer flavor, no questions asked. Archaeological sites like Pompeii have given us an amazingly vivid peek into Roman food culture. Every single food stall was dug up, stalls untouched, pots still charred, even snail shells, ducks, and beans preserved in ancient cookware. Some even had menus painted right above the serving windows. That marketing campaign beats most TikTok ads, hands down. Nowadays, chefs and historians are bringing Roman recipes back to life. Cookbooks translate recipes from Roman emperors into dishes you can actually try today, like honey-glazed dormouse tart. Modern Rome still serves up grub familiar to hungry commoners: fried artichokes, herb cheese, flatbread drizzled with oil. The empire may have crumbled, the emperors turned to dust, but the flavors stick around when you bite into something salty, crunchy, and ridiculously satisfying at 2 a.m. You're doing exactly what Romans did 2,000 years ago. You're literally eating history, one bite at a time. At the medieval court, silence was about as common as a unicorn, amid clinking glasses, rustling silk, and the occasional squabble. There was one soundtrack that never stopped playing, but not just any music would cut it. Want to set the mood for a royal party, calm a jittery noble, or smooth things over after a political showdown? You called them minstrels. They weren't background musicians chilling in the corner. Minstrels were the medieval world's original sound engineers. They delivered news, read poetry, performed bold ballads, and even wrote sharp satire on the fly, sometimes, while the crowd still gripped knives, instruments, lute, harps, flutes, and fiddles, and occasionally bagpipes. If you really wanted to wake the nobles up, a talented minstrel could turn a dull dinner party into a lyrical battlefield. Medieval courts ran on theatrics and performance, and minstrels were crucial players in both. They preserved heroic deeds, whether true or wildly exaggerated. If a knight killed a dragon or just wiped out trying, there'd be a song about it. The audience didn't care about facts. They cared about rhyme. Minstrels weren't just musical geniuses. They were wizards with words, with sharp wit and clever wordplay. They spun epic tales of doomed lovers, legendary warriors, and tragic betrayals. They could make a dashing lord laugh or a battle-hardened knight cry. And they knew exactly what was happening around them. If a baron just got caught in a scandal, maybe skipped the body roast that night, their place in the social ladder was flexible. Some were beloved in palaces, pampered and protected. Others were treated like honored clowns, singing for dinner, then crashing in the stables. But every minstrel knew one thing to survive at court. Your music had to be not just good, but spectacular, useful. 2. Political flattery, coded gossip, subtle warnings, all wrapped in poetry, packing serious power. because long before history was written, it was sung. Noble deeds, petty rivalries, courtly romances, they passed from minstrel to minstrel like living folklore. If a noble wanted their legacy remembered, they didn't need a statue. They needed a song. After all, minstrels didn't just play music, they played memory. When a minstrel entered a medieval court, they didn't bring sheet music or a Spotify playlist. They came armed with a mobile sound library, each instrument carefully picked to charm, mock, or mourn, depending on the crowd's mood and how drunk the nobles were. The lute ruled supreme. Its pear-shaped body and gentle tone made it perfect for tragic love ballads and heroic sagas. If you're a knight trying to impress a lady, or just want to spin your battlefield blunders into heroic tales, you definitely want a pillager nearby. Then comes the harp, not the golden angelic machine from Renaissance paintings, but a humble wooden frame strapped with strings. Tuned with saint-like patience, the harp can be soft and sweet, or smash your eardrums loud. This hairstyle usually shows up during court ceremonies, romantic moments, or when a lord wants to look deep in thought without actually thinking. Drums and tambourines bring the party's beat. They hype up the crowd, prep for battle, or get everyone dancing wildly after one too many drinks and zero dignity left. For something a little weirder, there's the vel, an early violin prototype with a haunting nasal tone, perfect for mournful whining or creepy campfire stories. Nothing sets the mood like a slow, sad vel solo by a crackling fire when someone's hinting at court betrayal. Flutes and pipes, great for lively dances or quirky background tunes. Even bagpipes have their moment. Mostly in Celtic palaces and northern lands, loved by locals, hated by everyone else. And then there's the singing. A minstrel's voice is their most important instrument, not trained in fancy music schools, but in bustling markets and noisy halls. Their voices have to drown out the chaos, drunken shouting, and sometimes the clatter of chicken bones on the throne. They mimic accents, belt out Latin hymns, sing fancy French, or spit witty local dialect jokes, all while keeping rhythm with drums or plucking strings. Every performance is a delicate dance between music and message. One wrong note and the crowd's out of there. One bad lyric could offend a noble, but nail it, and the minstrel becomes the heartbeat of the night. Instruments aren't just wood and strings. They're tools of persuasion, power, and survival. To an outsider, a medieval minstrel might just seem like background noise in the court, a pleasant distraction, while the nobles get hammered and forget everything. But their real role runs way deeper. Minstrels were emotional manipulators, PR officers, political commentators, and the living memory banks of the medieval court, all wrapped up in a song. They didn't just play music, they set the mood. A tense court meeting could be soothed with a good ballad, a bored queen's day brightened by a romantic chuckle. And when a knight returned from campaign, the minstrel had poems ready before the mud on his boots even dried. They were historians too, in a world with few books and even fewer scholars. Minstrels were the living archives. Their songs preserved family lineages, victories, battle wins, hidden scandals, and matchmaking deals. If your name popped up in a minstrel song, you were halfway to medieval immortality. But it wasn't all praise and flowery words. Minstrels could bite back. Court satire was a fine art, mocking lords with rhyme, masking insults in clever metaphors. A skilled minstrel knew exactly how far to push before a noble's giggle turned into a death stare. Some minstrels, especially those hopping from palace to palace, became famous for sharp wit and shocking verses, walking the tightrope between applause and scandal. They were diplomats too. Visiting courts often brought their own musicians along, These shows weren't just for kicks. They were displays of cultural finesse, soft power, and mutual respect. A flop performance could wreck a political deal. A sorrowful, beautiful lament could win support when words failed. Even in times of mourning, minstrels held their place. Noble funerals usually had carefully crafted songs not just to mourn, but to brag about the deceased's legacy through music. The higher the status, the louder the wailing, and the more pressure not to hit a wrong note. Some wandering minstrels became trusty confidants. Royals with few trusted friends whispered secrets to bards. Knowing the truth could be coded into verses only sharp listeners caught. Back in medieval courts, wandering minstrels didn't just play music. They were performing in the room. And in a world run by politics, pride, and showmanship, they were absolutely essential. Not all medieval musicians were cut from the same cloth. Sure, modern folks lump them all as minstrels, but medieval courts were way more particular. Titles mattered. Origins mattered even more. In the echoing royal halls, the difference between a troubadour and a jongleur could mean a seat at the feast or a night with the pigs. Let's start at the top. Minstrels originated from the court of Occitania, southern France. Troubadours were poets and composers who wrote and performed their own lyrical masterpieces. They sang in Occitan, the courtly language of love, with songs about noble passion, unrequited desire, and the soul-crushing agony of watching a duchess marry some geezer twice her age. Think of them as medieval singer-songwriters with a flair for dramatic heartbreak. Troubadours weren't beggars. Many were born into silk and velvet, some even knights, which got them royal access and sponsorship. They weren't expected to juggle or dance. They traded in poetry and finesse. A skilled troubadour could turn a simple war booty tune into a philosophical epic on love, honor, and social class. Below them were the trouvères, their northern cousins, same idea. But they sang in Old French, with themes leaning more toward knights, crusades, and heroic tales, basically medieval heavy metal. Less romantic longing, more heads rolling for glory. Then came the jongleurs, the real workhorses of medieval entertainment. Jongleurs were versatile, roamed around a lot, and were usually way less polished. They juggled, played tons of instruments, covered songs, told dirty jokes, gossiped, and sometimes even trained animals. If the troubadour was the classy performer at the tavern, the jongleur was the guy fiddling in the back, loud, unpredictable, and occasionally pretty clever. Jongleurs hopped from one court to another, town to town, living off tips and leftovers. They didn't have the prestige of minstrels, but could read a crowd like an open book. If a noble wanted a discreet insult delivered, the jongleur was their go-to, despite their differences. Troubadours and wanderers often teamed up. One wrote, the other performed. One praised the countess's eyes, the other roasted her hubby's bald spot. In the grand medieval court symphony, every musician had their part, harmony optional, drama guaranteed. If you think medieval songs were just about knights and rose gardens, think again. Minstrels might wear fancy robes and play instruments, but their lyrics cut deeper than any sword. Behind the tunes were sharp observations, witty jokes, romantic fantasies, and enough political shade to make a king sweat. Let's start with love songs, the lifeblood of court musicians. But this isn't just I love you, marry me stuff. Oh no. Courtly love was an emotional mazed desire, restraint, and romantic pain. The minstrel pledged undying loyalty to a woman already wed to someone important and ideally way less poetic. The desired prize was always out of reach because real thrill wasn't conquest itself. It's pain, emotional pain, But hey, it's fashionable pain. Songs describing a lover's eyes like twin stars, a touch like sunlight, a voice like church bells, or, if the poet's having a bad day, she's more like a goose in distress. This metaphor walks the fine line between flattery and pure exaggeration. The crowd eats it up, but not every song is that classy. Satirical songs were basically the medieval version of late-night comedy. They roasted greedy lords, corrupt priests, and knights with muscles, but zero brains. Minstrels mastered the art of mockery, hiding insults in clever rhymes and local slang. Everyone laughed, unless they were the target. Then, the advice was simple: run for your life. Next up, songs about scandals spreading from court to court like wildfire. This was medieval TMZ, but with more lyricism and less paparazzi. These were the medieval gossip bulletins tunes hinting at love affairs, betrayals, and mysterious disappearances. One well-timed verse could suggest Lady Elelena was spending way too much time with her servant. Without saying it outright, the beauty, plausible deniability. If a noble got offended and complained, the minstrel would just bow and say, "Sir, it's only a song." These tunes weren't usually written down. They passed by word of mouth, from one performer to another, changing with every retelling. What started as a romantic complaint at one court could turn into a savage roast at the next, whether praising a duchess, mocking a bishop, or exposing royal scandals. Minstrels danced on the knife edge between adoration and outrage at court. A clever verse could be deadlier than a dagger. Medieval court entertainment wasn't just a time killer. It was a calculated display of power, wealth, and taste. And no royal gathering was complete without minstrels blending into the soundscape every beat, breath, and rhyme. Parties were their main stage. Picture this: a grand hall decked out with banners, torches flickering on stone walls, nobles lounging on cushioned benches, goblets brimming, egos even fuller. And over the chatter and clinking trophies, a voice cuts through. Silence falls, and the show really begins. Minstrels knew how to work a room. Their outfits weren't just for show. They matched the evening's rhythm, a gentle dance to start, lift spirits, and calm nerves. Then came war, loyalty, or betrayal, dramatic enough to hook everyone, but not so much as to choke a baron's turkey. Towards the end, a few lively tunes got the duchesses blushing in front of their admirers. They weren't solo acts. Minstrels often performed alongside jugglers, acrobats, or even trained animals. A lavish feast might feature a harp solo followed by acrobatic monkeys. Basically, the hottest variety show of the 12th century. In the royal palace, music had another job, shining a light on the political mood. Hosting visiting nobles, sing about their family's glorious victories, an anthem to their epic wins. Need to dodge a tax hike? Drop a fresh scandalous song to stir envy instead. Is the king in a bad mood? Time for a soft ballad about loyalty, heroism, and not executing everyone today. Party entertainment doubled as propaganda. Minstrels sang the king's military victories, of course with a generous splash of embellishment, and conveniently ignored casualties. Songs reminded nobles of their duties, honor, and place under the king's polished boots. For the audience, this was more than just fun. It was social theater. Laughing too hard at a mocking verse could get you into serious trouble. Not clapping for a song praising the queen suspicious, knowing when to nod, chuckle, or sigh was part of high-class manners. Tightrope walkers, they perform for fun, sure, but also to make their mark on the stage. This isn't just a hall, it's a minefield of egos, secrets, and scheming. And they play, like total pros. While most history books love to hype knights and kings, the women behind medieval court music often sang in whispers, soft, poetic, and oddly unforgettable. Official power, mostly off limits. But some women carved out their own space in court sounds, turning melodies into subtle influence. Step into Troy, and you'd spot women, just like the famous troubadours from southern France. These ladies weren't just muses or backup singers. They were poets, composers, and performers in their own right, often penning verses that challenged gender roles and expectations. Their songs, yep, about love, but from a woman's point of view. Desire, rage, rebellion, empowerment, courtly love with a serious bite. The Trebarit crew might sing about a lover who broke his vows, or the chains marriage and status slapped on women. Their lyrics offer a rare peek inside the minds of noble medieval women. Lives usually hidden behind tapestries and etiquette. Then, there were noble women who supported and hosted these wandering artists. Queens and ladies of the court often acted as patrons, commissioning works to celebrate weddings, birthdays, alliances, or just to stroke their egos. Some even learned instruments like the harp or ukulele. Performing in private salons or women-only rooms, music was both entertainment and emotional outlet. Women were also the stars of songs idealized, romanticized, or roasted. But some troubadours crossed the line. They wrote gentle verses from a woman's view, biting poems about selfish husbands, or odes from widows who refused to remarry. This wasn't just performing. It was quiet rebellion. Outside the noble courts, in the chaotic world of traveling troupes and street performers, women often joined as singers, dancers, or comedians. Bold, captivating, and usually underpaid. But their presence was crucial, especially at festivals and fairs, where their voices added depth and charm to the show. Of course, the church wasn't thrilled. Female performers were often branded immoral or dangerous, banned from sacred places, or labeled temptresses. But they kept singing anyway, because music gave them a voice when society refused to. And though many names are lost, their songs fragmented, haunting, defiant still echo like harp strings behind stone walls. Not every troubadour got to play under chandeliers or get paid in gold by a drunken duke. Many worked the streets, wandering from town to town, castle to castle, market to market, chasing an audience, a bed, and hopefully some solid food that didn't run away. These wandering artists were the lifeblood of medieval music culture. Unlike their court counterparts, they had no steady patron, no fancy party schedule, and zero guarantees. They survived on skill, smarts, and a sharp read on the crowd's mood. If a village loved sad ballads, you sang the blues. If they wanted fart jokes about monks, you held your nose and delivered the goods. Their gear was portable: small harps, fiddles, drums, flutes. Some traveled with animals dancing bears, hat-wearing dogs, monkeys trained to steal wallets. Some doubled as healers, scammers, or messengers. Many crashed in stables, barns, or under starry skies, protected only by the popularity of their latest hit song. These wandering performers weren't just entertainers. They were the internet of their time. They carried news from faraway lands, war stories, courtly songs, and juicy gossip that could make a noble squirm. A clever traveling poet could grab attention with a catchy tune and cause serious castle drama if the lyrics hit too close to home. Despite their humble looks, many of these performers had seriously impressive skills. Some trained in royal courts before falling out of favor. Others learned on the road, picking up accents, styles, and tunes from all over. They were musical chameleons, switching dialects, and playing instruments like undercover diplomats. Their audiences ranged from farmers gathered around festival fires to petty lords throwing impromptu parties. Sometimes they were warmly welcomed. Other times, especially if they sang something spicy, they got kicked out of town with more bruises than coins. But they kept going, because for many troubadours, the road wasn't just a necessity, it was freedom. No fixed loyalties, no lords to suck up to or betray, just music, movement, an endless hope that the next town might have a better stage, a thicker wallet, or at least a bed without bedbugs. They weren't just performers, they were messengers, memory keepers, and cartographers of the human heart. As the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, the troubadour's world started fading, but never disappeared completely. Courts got fancier. Composers began writing sheet music instead of singing from memory. Professional musicians edged out the wandering troubadours, but the troubadour's legacy lingers like a tune you just can't forget. In many ways, they laid the groundwork for the modern artist. They got rhythm, the audience, and the art of storytelling. They turned gossip into poetry, pain into harmony, and politics into biting verse. Their craft was a living thing, a mix of song, social commentary, and survival instinct. Their impact ran deep. The troubadour tradition echoes in Renaissance magical art. Folk songs passed from peasants to printed ballads, themes of courtly love, noble sacrifice, and daring rebellion made their way into works by poets like Chaucer and Shakespeare. Even Italy's first operas, high, dramatic, and full of passion, borrowed from those gritty medieval performances in drafty great halls. As courts got exclusive and music more standardized, the troubadour's spirit moved on to town squares, traveling theaters, and taverns where fiddlers played tunes older than the walls around them. Right into the hearts of those who still told stories with sound. Today, we still hear their echoes. Street performers juggling, singing, and flirting with the crowd. That's the pure energy of Jean Lure. Singers and musicians pouring their soul out through guitars. Modern troubadours, serving up political satire wrapped in lyrical form. The wandering minstrels would be proud. Even literature and fantasy films, anything with castles, knights, and some guy waving around loot in the corner, owe a big thanks to these characters. They're the unsung glue of medieval imagination, stitching together tales of heroes with a dash of fun, romance, and mockery. And despite centuries of change, one thing stayed the same. People still crave a good tune. We still gather round to listen, to feel, and to figure out who we really are, whether it's a Spotify playlist or a harp strummed by torchlight. The bards may have vanished, their verses fluttering away like parchment in the wind, but their legacy, oh, that's still very much alive. Behind every show meant to entertain, enlighten, or provoke, there's a medieval artist quietly smiling backstage,